there! So you found me. Yet again. Here we are. As I record this, I am almost done writing my first novel. Ever. And that means that this is the first draft, and I feel like part of the hard part is over. I'm gonna let this one sit for at least like a week or two before I even dare try to edit it. I'm definitely a lot further behind my schedule than what I wanted to be, but I did want to sit down and kind of go over what the process was like and maybe kind of answer some typical questions that people have about writing novels. So in terms of my personal process, the way that I approached it isn't conventional, so I don't want to get hung up on that. But what I decided to do was I was going to try, and I say try very loosely, but I was going to try and write about 3,000 words a day. And it took me a while, and I didn't always hit that mark. And sometimes, surprisingly, I actually went over it. But I was dedicating anywhere between generally an hour and a half to almost 3 to 4 hours every day to write. Again, I know, not very conventional, but it was the path that I decided to take. And it's a very doable thing, even if you're not going to take it to the extreme that I did. If you want to write a novel by the end of the year, honestly, if you start by writing even 300 words a day, which takes me approximately 20 minutes, thereabout, the more that you write, the better that you'll get. And I know. We'll get there, writer's block, all of that. I honestly think that it's very doable. 100% if you sit down and make yourself just write 300 words every day. Don't look at it necessarily like I have to have everything completely scripted out. If you're one of the type that likes to write out an outline for their story, that's okay. But part of writing and the fun of it really is kind of letting things unfold. Me personally, the way I like to look at it is when I'm sitting down writing, I like to have an idea of where I'm going, but ultimately the story will tell me in the end. So it's almost like one of those things. You heard what happened. That's your outline. But actually experiencing what happened, that's the story. That's the approach I like to take. And then continuing on with my actual process. It took me about a month and a half longer than I was expecting. I really wanted to have this done back in March, and now it is May. And I'm a little discouraged by the fact that it took that much extra time. But I really did struggle with the last 2 chapters of the book. It was really hard for me to sit down and force myself to write them. Ultimately, because I knew where the story was going, and I just kind of wanted it to be over at that point, because we had gotten through the parts that I thought were fun, and I was a little hesitant to say goodbye. I feel like any first-time author can really appreciate that. Sometimes it may fall into the realm of we don't want to let go, and then other times it's almost like a sigh of relief that it's finally over. And maybe sometimes it's a combination of the two. I think I'm sitting somewhere in the realm of a combination of the two, even though I lean more heavily towards I was just thankful for it to be over. So in terms of things that people struggle with, I know the very first question a lot of people ask is, how do I even write a novel? Do I have to outline it? Do I have to do all of these things? Do I have to have everything put together before I start? And me personally, I'm gonna say no. Sometimes just getting things out onto paper is the best way. If you're somebody who likes to plan, go ahead and plan. But the issue that I have with planning is this. It always seems to turn into the thing where if you sit there and you overplan, it never gets written. That's where I was at. I knew my story inside and out. I basically had almost every scene kind of plotted out. I just had to sit down and actually do the work at that point. And it was really hard to get yourself to that point, because it's a lot easier to sit down and think about it, because then it's all just up in your head, and you don't have to worry about actually committing to the page. And there's a weirdness that comes with it when you finally get words written on a page, whether it be on a program or whether it be physical. It doesn't really matter. It's just, there's almost like this feel that it's permanent now, that you won't be able to shift or change it, and that's hogwash. As long as you're still drafting, as long as you're still working and editing, then you have infinite ability to change things and move things. If you don't like the way things flow, you can fix that. Yes, after you publish it, there's not really any going back from that. But right now, you are playing, and stop treating it like it's so serious. You are allowed to enjoy the process and to play. So allow yourself the ability to do that. If we sit there and we take things too seriously, then ultimately, again, nothing gets done. It just sits there, and we worry about it. So stop worrying about it. Now, other questions that do always seem to come up when writing a novel is concerned is like character development or plot and, all of the little things that make a story a story. And I don't really subscribe to the idea that if you want to write better, that you should read more, necessarily, but I do think you should have an understanding of how people communicate and interact with one another. If you want your characters to feel real, then they have to have realistic traits and qualities. They can't all be perfect. They can't all be just one thing, because people are multi-dimensional. So if you want to take the approach of sitting down, get to know your characters, I don't think that's a bad thing. But I also don't feel like you need to do that with every single instance. Sometimes you just know what your character is going to do. And if you don't, that's a good time to workshop. But ultimately, all of those other little questions that come into building a story, that's a lot of you sitting down and reflecting and working on the process. It's gonna be a lot of workshop. It's gonna take some time. Unless you want to just pump out a story that's kind of meaningless to you. Honestly, doing that stuff's not hard. It just depends on where you fall and what you want to create. Do you want to create for something that you enjoy, or do you want to create simply maybe as a means of making an income? I mean, smut is getting way more popular than it ever has been before, and it's a good way to make money. But ultimately, it's not always what every author wants to do. Myself, I don't really want to write smut, so I don't, and that's okay. And in the same line as like character development and things like that, a lot of people get kind of hung up on dialogue, and I think that's something that people like to overcomplicate. Dialogue can be tricky. I'm not denying it. But the reason why I say people overcomplicate it is because they use dialogue as an excuse to kind of explain a lot of things. But really, it should be your characters interacting with one another. It's almost like you're kind of reserved from the conversation. And it's literally just the way that your characters communicate, what they see about situations, any questions or concerns they may have, any clarity they're trying to seek, or even any emotions that they're trying to convey. These are all things that'll make your dialogue stand out and feel a little bit more real. Because think about the last time you just had a conversation. What did you talk about? Follow the flow of your conversation. Really get to know how people interact. And try to do it with actual people, not necessarily like scripts and things like that, because scripts are made to sell to people because they're trying to grab your attention. But if you want your characters to feel more real, you have to make them more realistic. It's not always strictly going to be about what's going on. Sometimes, maybe your character is standing in a kitchen, and to make it feel a little bit more real, maybe you can make them hum a little song. And the other character asks, "Where'd you hear that song?" And it sparks something a little bit more real. Yeah, you always want your dialogue to have some kind of meaning and purpose behind it. It's not like we're just trying to sit here and emulate life. But at the same time, you do have to emulate it just a tiny bit in order for it to feel like something. Little details and little nuances are going to be what really makes your characters, your plot, your setting, all of it come together. So really try and remember those. I'm not saying fixate on them. I'm just saying remember that those are things that you should be including. This leads into plot next. So plot is kind of one of those hard ones to tackle when it comes to stories. I personally don't like to get too caught up in plot, especially like maybe during my first or second run through of outlining. I just like to kind of write out everything that's in my head. I like to know what I'm seeing. I like to kind of lay out the little bits and pieces, and then I kind of rearrange it, and I figure out the story from there. Honestly, your story is always going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's always going to have some kind of introduction, some kind of conflict, and ultimately some kind of resolution. Either positive or negative, however you want to view that. But the 3-stage arc is pretty standard, and there's a reason why. Because stories will always have some kind of lesson or some kind of conflict that we are trying to resolve. Something that we are trying to make each other face. Me, as the author, I'm trying to have you, as the viewer and the audience, face this dilemma. And we go through this experience together. And hopefully we learn from it. Or at the very least, we enjoyed it. So keeping that in mind, there's also the concept of pace and things like that, and tone, and really getting into the nitty-gritty of what makes your story and your plot kind of mesh together. You don't want it to be too overwhelming, but also at the same time, you want it to be engaging. And a lot of times too, I know it's not super helpful to hear, but honestly, whatever novel you're trying to write, whatever story, whatever book, whatever, it doesn't matter what the format is. What matters is what is important to you. I personally really like character development, so I do tend to lean a little heavy into that. There are some people who really would prefer the actual plot. Instead, though, the arc, and to understand the process. Sometimes even people do settings and how settings are impacted by the story. Things like that. It really comes down to what you're trying to do with the story. What is your purpose for writing it? What are you trying to convey? And I know that can be a little mind-numbing to hear, because ultimately you can do whatever you want with it. It's completely up to you. You just have to figure out how you want to handle it. And then lastly, I know I said I would get back to writer's block. Writer's block is hard, and I do. I totally get the struggle. I've not actually sat down and written anything in almost 5 years, and it's a daunting process. But just like anything else, the more you make yourself do things, the more easily it will come. Think about anything that you do every single day, and think about when you started doing that versus where you are now. Eventually, at some point, it just kind of became automatic. Muscle memory. Your body just knows what to do. Maybe it's a routine. It's just something that you go on autopilot mode and just achieve. Now, in terms of writing, I know it kind of sucks to sit there and think, oh, well, I don't want to just be on autopilot. I want to enjoy the process. You can still enjoy the process, but what I'm getting at is that you have to make yourself sit down and do it. A lot of times we get writer's block because we don't consistently do this, or we get so hung up on the perfection of it that we allow it to just kind of slip by us. So my best suggestion for writer's block, truly, is to consider your story. If you get to a point where you honestly don't know what to write next, consider where your story is going. Really think about it. And once you have that idea in your head, just kind of figure out how we're going to get there. If you have to, like I had said earlier, break it down. Maybe only write 200 words a day. Maybe get on there and only just type a paragraph. Maybe you hate that paragraph later, but at least you did something, and that's the point. Because writing a novel is the hard part. It's not hard because you want to sit there and make a perfect world. It's not hard because you can sit there and imagine this place and these people and these events and all of that. That's the fun stuff. The hard part is sitting down, putting words on a page. Because it's a commitment. It's you committing to it. And a lot of times, I feel like perfection gets in the way. We want it to be perfect. We want it to be great. We want it to be the next best thing we've ever done. We want it to be engaging. We want people to love it. Because we put so much hard work into it, and we've been thinking about it so much. But sometimes, you just have to sit down and write it. More than likely, your first draft you're not gonna love. So it's okay. It's okay if maybe, you skip around a little bit. Maybe you decide, hey, I'm gonna cut out this whole page. Because I didn't like any of that. It's all about bridging the gaps, though. We're trying to get from point A to point B. So however you choose to do that. In the end, it's up to you, though. You have to decide what's important. You have to decide what you're trying to say with this story. Because it's your story. So don't let anybody else tell it. And also, too, when it comes to writer's block, sometimes you do just have to take a break. Sometimes you just have to set it up on the shelf. If you don't feel inspired, you just have to leave it there. I know it sucks because you want to get it done, but it will be there, believe me. Mine has been sitting up on the shelf for 5-6 years, but eventually you will feel either inspired to continue or you won't. And if it's something you really want to finish, it won't stay on that shelf forever. So eventually you'll take it back down and you'll continue working on it. But if you're trying to power through and you're trying to just get through writer's block, my best suggestion is what I said. Just take little baby steps. Consider where the story is going. Consider how you're going to get there. Maybe you'll fix it later. Maybe you'll hate it later. Who knows? But at least it'll be written down. And that's the important part. So, with all of this said, I hope that you found this helpful. I know it's not an easy process. And I know it's unique and individual, just as every single author that exists in the world. But if it's something that you want to do, you've got this. And I believe in you. So until next time, take care of yourself and keep going.